leave the dead to bury their own dead.
Yeah, it's just an absolutely devastating line.
Right, you hear that today, and it sounds, harsh or maybe a little metaphorical. But in the first century Jewish culture we are looking at today, refusing to let a son bury his father, I mean, that violated one of the most non-negotiable social obligations in existence. Every single listener hearing that would have just stopped dead in their tracks. It is a jaw-dropping disruption of social norms.
Oh, absolutely. And that disruption, well, it's entirely the point.
And I'm telling you, that is really just the beginning. Because within the next hour of our deep dive into Luke chapter 9, we're going to uncover this massive aha moment that completely changes how you read this text. Like, we're going to see that the famous mountaintop transfiguration wasn't just, some shiny mystical miracle.
Right, it was a highly political summit.
Exactly. We're going to explore how the text uses the specific Greek word exodos to signal a massive new liberation. And it's this profound moment that the disciples just completely fail to grasp, like literally 20 feet down the road when they try to annihilate a village.
Yeah, and our mission for this deep dive is to unpack exactly that dynamic. We're going right into the source text of Luke chapter 9 to look at the grassroots organizing happening on the ground and the very real political panic of the Roman-appointed rulers who are watching this movement grow.
Which is setting up a huge messianic drama.
Exactly. It sets Jesus on a direct collision course with the absolute highest establishment powers of his day.
So to understand how a shock value teaching, like leave the dead to bury their own dead, actually fits in, we have to start by looking at how Jesus is building this movement from the ground up, and specifically who is terrified by it. The action opens with Jesus commissioning the 12.
Right, he doesn't just send them out to politely share a message.
No, not at all. He commissions them as what our briefing calls a mobile strike force. He gives them authority over demons, he gives them the power to heal, and then, this is the crazy part, he gives them strict orders to travel with no supplies, no money, no extra clothes. They are ordered to fan out across Galilee and rely completely on the hospitality of strangers.
It's really a brilliant tactical move if you look at the social dynamics of the ancient Near East.
Wait, I really have to push back on that. Practically speaking, sending a team out with zero money or food sounds like a recipe for starvation, not really a political masterstroke. How does making your followers intentionally destitute actually help build a sustainable movement?
Because of the mechanism of ancient hospitality. In that culture, taking someone into your home and breaking bread with them wasn't just being polite, it formed a binding social contract.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, by sending the 12 out with absolutely nothing, Jesus forces a scenario where they must be invited into homes. You stay in someone's house, you eat their food, you heal their sick. You're establishing an interlocking web of local obligation and loyalty.
Okay, let's unpack this. If you are listening to this and wondering how that translates today, think about modern grassroots political campaigning. When a candidate really wants to build a rock-solid base, they don't just blast television ads.
Right, they send organizers out.
Exactly. They knock on doors, they sleep on volunteers' couches, they eat at local diners. It weaves the movement directly into the fabric of the community.
And that ground-level organizing is incredibly resilient. And honestly, it's exactly what made Roman governors and client kings so nervous. Which brings us to the political shadow looming over this entire chapter, Herod Antipas.
The tetrarch, right?
Yeah, he is the Roman-appointed tetrarch of Galilee and Perea and the son of Herod the Great. He's the dominant political force in the region, and he has a very recent, very bloody history with destabilizing popular voices.
Yeah, the text mentions he is the one who executed John the Baptist.
Exactly. He had John beheaded specifically to eliminate the kind of populist threat that Jesus is now organizing. Antipas took out the leader, expecting the movement to just, scatter and fade.
It didn't.
No. Instead, he starts hearing reports of this new mobile strike force running through his territory, performing miracles and drawing huge crowds. The text tells us he is rattled. He literally says, "John I beheaded, but who is this about whom I hear such things?"
Like, he thinks it might be a ghost. He's sitting there wondering if this is John resurrected, or Elijah, or some other returning ancient prophet. I mean, the guy controls the entire region by the permission of the Roman Empire. And he is sitting in his palace sweating over a rumor.
Well, his perplexity goes far beyond mere superstition. It points to a deep strategic vulnerability.
What do you mean?
Think about the mechanics of authoritarian power. A dictator controls a population primarily through the threat of violence and death. But how do you maintain control over someone who has already come back from the dead?
Oh, wow. Yeah, you can't.
Exactly. A resurrected prophet would be fundamentally ungovernable. You cannot threaten a man with execution if execution didn't work the first time. Antipas is desperate to get a look at this man to assess the actual operational threat to his regime.
So if Antipas is actively hunting for him in Galilee, Jesus has a massive geographic problem. Before we dive into the next section, think about this. Where can a wanted man actually go to escape a Roman-appointed tetrarch? And what ancient, deeply ingrained cultural memory is he about to trigger for 5,000 men sitting out in the wilderness?
Well, to solve the geographic problem, the text tells us Jesus pulls the 12 away to a town called Bethsaida. Geography is the key here.
Right, where exactly was that?
Bethsaida sat on the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee, near the mouth of the Jordan River. Crucially, it was just inside the territory of Philip the Tetrarch.
Oh, so to translate that for us today, he essentially crossed an international border.
Precisely. Philip's territory is a completely different political jurisdiction from Herod Antipas's Galilee. Antipas has no legal authority to send his guards across that border to arrest someone.
So it's not just a vacation.
No, Jesus retreating to Bethsaida isn't just about finding a quiet place to debrief his disciples. The text may suggest it is a highly strategic retreat from danger. He is putting a jurisdictional boundary between himself and a panicked dictator.
The quiet retreat doesn't last, though, does it? The crowds figure out where he went, and they follow him by the thousands. Suddenly, evening comes, and you have 5,000 men sitting out in the remote wilderness.
And that's when Jesus does the impossible.
Yeah, he takes 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, and it becomes enough to fill every single person there with 12 baskets of leftovers to spare. Now, we have all heard the story of the feeding of the 5,000, but looking at our source notes, there is a massive subtext here that modern audiences totally miss. What were the people in that crowd actually experiencing?
What's fascinating here is that they were experiencing a profound historical echo. If you are a first-century Jewish person sitting in that grass, you're not just seeing a magic trick with food.
You're seeing something way bigger.
Exactly. Think about the 3 main components of the scene. You have a singular leader, you are gathered out in a remote wilderness, and you are receiving bread from an unexpected, miraculous source.
Oh, I see where this is going. It's the story of Moses. It is the manna falling from heaven in the desert.
Yep. The parallels to the Exodus are unmistakable. First-century Jewish audiences would have recognized that resonance instantly. Providing wilderness bread was a known messianic identifier.
So it shifts our entire deep dive from just looking at what Jesus is doing to a very dangerous question of who he actually is.
Exactly.
So basically, pulling off a wilderness food miracle was the first-century equivalent of holding up a giant neon sign saying, "I am the rightful king."
It forces the ultimate question of identity. And Jesus takes the conversation there next. He gets his disciples in private, away from the crowds, and he asks them point blank, "Who do people say that I am?"
And they give him the popular rumors,
Yeah.
right? John the Baptist, Elijah, a prophet of old.
Right. Then he looks at them and asks, "But who do you say that I am?" And Peter answers, "The Christ of God."
Which is wild, because we hear the word Christ today, and we treat it like it's Jesus' last name, but it's not a name at all.
Not at all. Christ translates to Messiah, or anointed king. We often interpret the word today through a purely spiritual lens, but in an occupied territory in the first century, Christ was a massively loaded political title.
Because it means king.
Yes. When Peter says the Christ of God, he is not merely making a theological observation, he is declaring a new king.
Naming a new king when Rome already has an emperor and Herod already has a throne is the literal definition of treason.
Which is exactly why Jesus' immediate response is to order them to absolute silence. He commands them to tell no one.
He's trying to keep them alive.
Right. That order for silence is strictly about operational survival. If the wrong people hear that title too early, the apparatus of the state comes down on them instantly. Jesus explicitly names the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes as his future executioners.
And those groups made up the Jerusalem temple establishment, primarily the Sanhedrin, right?
Exactly.
But how did the Sanhedrin actually function in this context? Because they weren't just, religious leaders giving sermons, were they?
Far from it. The Sanhedrin managed a massive economic and political engine. They controlled the temple tax, the highly lucrative commerce of animal sacrifices, and they maintained a very delicate, highly negotiated truce with the Roman Empire.
Ah, so Rome let them run things as long as they behaved.
Precisely. The Romans allowed them to govern their internal affairs as long as they kept the peace and kept the tax revenue flowing. So, a Galilean preacher marching on Jerusalem with a mass following bearing the title of Anointed King threatens to upend that entire arrangement.
Because if a riot breaks out, Rome gets involved.
Yes, Rome's standard response to unrest is to send in the legions, slaughter the instigators, and strip the local authorities of their power. The temple establishment would crush this movement before he ever set foot in the city, just to protect their own survival.
And here is where it gets really interesting. Right after ordering them to stay quiet to avoid being crushed by the establishment, Jesus pivots to something incredibly dark. He predicts his own suffering.
Yeah, it's a harsh shift.
He says he will be rejected, killed, and on the third day be raised. He tells the crowd that following him means taking up a cross daily. And we have to remember, a cross wasn't a piece of jewelry back then. It was an active instrument of state execution used against rebels and slaves.
It was a symbol of total defeat.
Right. And then, following that heavy prediction, 8 days later, he takes Peter, James, and John, and they go up a mountain.
A mountain that remains unnamed in Luke's account, though some scholars believe it to be Mount Tabor in the Jezreel Valley, or possibly Mount Hermon near Caesarea Philippi in the far north.
Regardless of the exact coordinates, the event that happens there is mind-bending. Jesus is transfigured before them. His appearance changes. His clothing becomes dazzling white. And suddenly, 2 historical figures appear next to him out of nowhere. Moses and Elijah.
Yeah?
Out of all the figures in Jewish history, why these 2 specific guys?
Well, in the Jewish worldview, Moses represented the Torah, the law, and Elijah represented the prophetic tradition. These are the 2 great pillars of Jewish scripture. Having them stand there serves to validate Jesus' mission.
Okay, let's unpack this. I noticed in the source materials that they're having a very specific conversation. They are discussing his coming departure, which he's about to accomplish at Jerusalem. I am looking at the notes on the original Greek text here, and it highlights a specific word. Why does the single word Luke uses for departure matter so much?
Because the Greek word Luke uses is exodos. Yeah, that is the true aha moment of this entire narrative. They are not just having a casual conversation about him dying or leaving. They are using the specific word that signals the foundational story of Israel's rescue from Egypt.
The original Exodus was the ultimate liberation from slavery and the birth of a nation.
Exactly. By using the word exodos to describe what Jesus will do in Jerusalem, the text is declaring that Jesus is about to accomplish a new, ultimate liberation. It frames his impending death not as a tragic defeat at the hands of the Sanhedrin, but as a deliberate, monumental rescue mission.
It is such a towering, majestic moment. A divine voice speaks from a cloud saying, "This is my son, my chosen one, listen to him." The disciples are terrified and awestruck, and you would think that witnessing a literal mountaintop summit about a new exodus would fundamentally change a person's perspective forever. You would think they would come down from that mountain completely aligned with this massive cosmic mission.
You would think so, but human nature is remarkably stubborn, and old paradigms are hard to break.
The whiplash between the top of the mountain and the bottom of the road is just tragic. They come down the mountain to a massive crowd, and immediately there is chaos. A man begs for help for his demon-possessed son.
And the disciples can't do anything about it.
Right. Jesus has to step in and exorcise the boy himself, because the disciples, the exact same guys who were given authority over demons at the beginning of the chapter, couldn't do it. Then Jesus predicts his betrayal into human hands again. And how do the disciples respond to all of this heavy prophetic weight? They start arguing among themselves about which one of them is the greatest.
It is staggering to read. I mean, they have just seen the unfiltered glory of God, and within minutes they are back to petty squabbling over status and rank.
And the real human failure, the part that actually made me gasp when I read the source text, happens just down the road. The group arrives at a Samaritan village. They are traveling, they need a place to stay, but the village refuses to give Jesus shelter.
Because of where he was going.
Right, the text says they rejected him specifically because his face was set toward Jerusalem. Why is that specific detail, heading to Jerusalem, such a deal breaker for a Samaritan village?
To understand the mechanism of that rejection, we have to look at the violent history of the region. The animosity between Samaritans and Judean Jews dates all the way back to the Assyrian conquest of the northern kingdom in the 8th century BCE.
That is a long time to hold a grudge.
It is. The Assyrians deported the Israelite elites and resettled the land with foreign populations. Those foreigners intermarried with the remaining Israelites, creating a syncretic culture and religion. Judean Jews viewed the Samaritans as racially and religiously corrupted.
And the Samaritans obviously didn't agree with that.
No. In response, the Samaritans built their own rival temple on Mount Gerizim, arguing it was the true holy site, not Jerusalem. So when a Jewish teacher with a massive following demands hospitality while making a pilgrimage to the rival city of Jerusalem, it is deeply offensive to the locals.
So the village rejects them based on centuries of bad blood. And James and John, two of the three guys who were just on the mountain, who just heard Jesus talk with Moses and Elijah about a new exodus of liberation, respond to this cold reception by turning to Jesus and asking for permission to call down fire from heaven and absolutely annihilate the entire village, burn them alive.
And Jesus immediately rebukes them. What is so striking here is Luke's brilliant, quiet drama as a writer. He doesn't insert a long editorial about how foolish the disciples are. He just lets the contrast land without comment.
It speaks for itself.
Exactly. You have James and John, who witnessed the divine voice in the Exodos summit, and 20 feet down the road, they are acting like petty warlords eager to commit a massacre over a denied hotel room.
It is a profound portrait of how completely human beings can be shaped by spectacle, and then fail to carry the lesson even 20 feet. That gap, the distance between the high-minded theology of the mountain and the gritty, frustrating reality of the road, that is where the whole chapter lives.
It really forces us to examine the mechanics of our own reactions. We often grasp a big idea or experience a moment of profound clarity, but the moment we encounter resistance, friction, or old prejudices, like an unwelcoming Samaritan village, we revert instantly to our worst, most destructive instincts.
Honestly, it's a lot to process. But before we wrap up today's deep dive, we want to know what stands out to you. Drop a comment below with your thoughts on today's historical drama. Were you more shocked by Herod's authoritarian panic over a ghost, or the disciples' spectacular failure to read the room right after the Transfiguration? If you're getting value out of this deep dive, please take a second right now to like and subscribe. It is the best way to help us keep unpacking these incredible texts for you. Also, do not forget to check the description below. We've put exclusive links to our sources, some really fascinating maps showing the jurisdictional borders of Galilee and Bethsaida, and further reading on the history of the Sanhedrin and the Samaritans.
And the story doesn't end here. Jesus has now set his face toward Jerusalem, delivering 3 brutal tests to his would-be followers as they travel. Will this grassroots movement survive the dangerous road ahead, or will the looming shadow of the temple establishment crush them before they ever arrive? Find out what actually happens on the road as the journey continues in the next chapter.
So what does this all mean for us? You know, looking at James and John wanting to rain down fire on a village really changes how I view that new exodus they talked about on the mountain. When the Israelites left Egypt, the hardest part wasn't leaving the physical country. It was getting the mindset of Egypt out of the people. James and John are supposed to be leaders of a new liberation, but their immediate instinct is to use the fire and violence of the old empires to solve their problems. They want to conquer like pharaohs. It makes you wonder, how often do we claim to be fighting for a new, liberated world while secretly just wanting the power to burn down the people who annoy us? Keep digging into the sources, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.